What's up, everyone? I'm gonna go ahead and take you through my favorite way to train external rotation of the hip, and definitely my favorite way to apply pails and rails within that. So let's go ahead and go over the details, but first let's just get into it. So you're gonna want the table to be a certain height depending on your height. If we have the table higher, it actually is gonna require more hip flexion, which is gonna be different for everybody. We definitely don't want any pinching in the front of the hip at all, but having it somewhere so that it's comfortable to a certain extent and allowing us to get into the correct sensation is really the number one thing we need. So oftentimes when we get into this, people are gonna actually shy away from 90 degrees and they're gonna end up in something that looks a little bit more like a pigeon and having my butt go away from the camera. But what I really need to be able to do is try to get into that really good 90-degree angle and even pull my toes so that I'm dorsiflexing my ankle and getting my butt back. Most people are gonna feel a great stretch right here. The stretch we wanna feel is gonna be deep on the outside of the hip. It's not a pigeon stretch, it's a capsule stretch. We're really actually getting into the deepest part of the joint, and we definitely want it to be out here on the outside towards the back of the hip. Now, once we get our positioning down, the most important way to find this stretch is to avoid flexion of the lumbar and also posterior pelvic tilt. We want to be able to actually try to anterior tilt, so pulling back and even extending my spine. As I go over it, the stretch should increase and it should get harder. I want to really be able to think about pulling my butt back, tilting it. There's another thing that'll happen when people get to the 90, oftentimes they'll start to lose the rest of their body and rotate out. And then we can think about not only pulling back, but getting that right hip to actually pull around, and that'll create even more tension within the capsule and lighting that up. Now, as always, everybody's an individual circumstance, so as long as you're avoiding rounding out like this, we can take our hands around and explore, and maybe you're ended up doing your pails and rails in a very specific position to you. Maybe I'm just straight over it. Either one of those is okay. Now, in terms of regressing it, just taking a block, if I put this block under my knee, I'm in less external rotation. So I can make this as high as I want. If someone's really limited in external rotation, using a slant board and actually getting it to be very high could be an option. And just keep in mind, as that goes up, we're probably also gonna have to maybe drop the table, so that way we have a little bit less flexion. It's a matter of just finding exactly where that person needs to be. Now, why do I like this over other things? So say I'm someone who's very limited, I get them on the ground, put them on blocks, all kinds of stuff, and they have a really hard time at even finding the stretch there. Are we wasting our time? No, but we're definitely not being as efficient as possible if they're not even feeling the correct things. So what I do is if I get them up here, say that person is actually super limited in maybe both external and internal rotation. What happens with the back hip is if you're limited, it's gonna hike you up and you're not gonna be able to fully get into the front hip. So by putting the back hip on the ground, it frees me up, gives me a little bit more leverage. I'm able to get over it, and then I can really get into the correct sensation. It also allows me to, if I need to, even bend my knee, and I'm probably gonna be able to spend a lot more time here, especially with blocks, sticks, or anything else to create leverage than I would be able to on the ground. When we talk about sinking into the passive stretch, sinking in like this is much easier than having to hold on onto the ground, especially when you're dealing with being limited in the back hip, like I said. So that's the main reason why I really like this. Now, getting into our pails and rails, I'm gonna go ahead and stay all the way over it as best I can. If I'm up here, that's where I'm at. Doesn't matter wherever you are. You're gonna start driving your front foot down, your shin, your knee. Your abs are gonna be the first in attention, and after that, we direct attention to the hip. So yes, we're cueing foot down heavy so that we can scoop through the table. It's not possible, it's an isometric, but the idea of putting a rotational focus or intent within your mind. But at the same time, it's really the hip that needs to create the most tension along with keeping your core tight. Make sure that you don't find yourself just using your ankle or just trying to turn through your knee. Really, the hip should be the main thing pushing down through the table for our pails. Now for our rails, getting someone to really feel this as if you were all the way over it and you're trying to crush the block in between here is a wonderful idea. At the same time, what we do want to be able to do is do it without the block. So if we can build up to really feeling the sensation without the block, that would be great too. A common mistake we'll see with this is when we go for our rails, a lot of people are going to be so stuck up on trying to actually get movement that they're going to end up just moving through their lower back. So my hip hasn't necessarily rotated at all. It's mostly just I'm faking it through my lower back. If it does lift, then you need to stay over it, and that's where that block can really work hard to get that to happen and to really turn into it. On my rails portion, I can also think about the same thing, about really pulling back and around as I try to give myself a little bit more space and pull myself forward. So that's going to be a breakdown on why we like to use that, different ways to regress it. It really is the best way to speed up the learning curve, in my opinion. What's up, everyone? So what I want to do is go over kinetic stretching from the 90-90. What we're doing with kinetic stretching is really just owning the entire range of motion. And you'll notice that it's actually your pails and rails that are either pulling you in or pushing you out of it. Now, from a learning perspective, getting someone to feel all the different corners, going forward, going back, and really utilizing tension to do that is what's also going to improve the learning curve of your pails and rails. So by doing some reps of kinetic stretching, maybe even during your passive portion, we can fire up, we can start to get into the sensation. For some people, doing isometrics takes a while to click. So having them start off with maybe something a little bit more dynamic and explore is a good way to really lock in exactly what we want from them when they go into their pails and rails. So when we're talking about actually getting into, I'm going to show you on the table, since I'm such a big fan of it, everything we're doing right now could just be done in the 90-90 the exact same way. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get up here. I got 90 degrees, and then what I can also do is I can put this here. Now, we talked about the idea of this being good feedback because I want to really get over this and try to get my rib cage not only over it, but into it at the same time. I'm also trying to bring my knee up to my chest, so both of these are closing into each other. Ribs into the knee, knee into the ribs, but I'm also not rounding my lower back, so remember that. So say I'm gonna start in my end range. To get out of here and start the kinetic stretch, what I would do is I would utilize my pails. So on a 10 count, I'm gonna start to fire up the outside of my hip, pushing through here, keeping that 90-degree angle. Once I ramp up after 10 seconds, I can start to slowly push away. Now I have my hands here, I can lift them up, I can shift them over, I could use blocks, I could only use this range of motion, but essentially we want you to be able to drive through here, lifting your chest with the tension created from your hip. Once you get up nice and tall, I want to reverse that and see if I can pull myself deeper into the stretch using my rails contraction. Again, to make it easier, I can push the table away from me, giving a little bit less load on the hip by using my hands, and then I can think about lifting the knee into my chest to pull it towards me. I could take this away and I could close that gap all the way and get all the way over it, drive through. I could use sticks, could really use anything. I suggest starting off with maybe 5 to 10 seconds there, 5 to 10 seconds back. That would be 1 rep, and maybe doing 5 reps. When you want to use them as a learning kind of tool and getting someone to feel the sensation so their pails are better, or their pails and rails are a little bit more successful, that's great. One of the ways that I also use them is definitely post pails and rails. Maybe hit a quick 5 reps before we get out of it. And remember, you can definitely do this in the 90-90. It's just a matter of having the correct positioning, as we've detailed in our blog post. If you have any questions about that, please let me know, and definitely check out the IR one as well.